The sheriff slapped a stranger in a diner. He didn't know he was a Navy SEAL. United War.
It was just past lunchtime at a quiet roadside diner. The kind of place where the neon sign flickers slightly. Coffee is always hot, and the scent of fried bacon mixes with fresh coffee. A few locals sat scattered at the booths. Conversations were soft. The hum of the refrigerator and the occasional clink of a spoon against a mug filled the air. At the counter sat a man no one noticed at first. Jeans, faded t-shirt, baseball cap low over his eyes, hands folded neatly on the table, sipping black coffee. Calm, observant, like he belonged nowhere and everywhere at once. The diner door swung open. A sheriff stepped in, badge gleaming, hat tilted just right, presence commanding. He spotted a man arguing quietly with the waitress over a spilled order. Tension flared. "Hey, watch it," the sheriff barked, stepping between the two. The man said nothing. He simply looked up, calm, eyes steady. The sheriff, annoyed and not known for patience, raised his hand, a sharp slap across the stranger's shoulder. The diner went still. Coffee cups paused mid-air. Conversation stopped. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed quieter. The stranger didn't flinch, didn't yell, didn't retaliate. He simply took a deep breath, set his coffee down, and turned slowly to face the sheriff. Eyes locked, calm, focused. "Sir," he said evenly, "that wasn't necessary." The sheriff frowned. "Not necessary?" he repeated. "I'm the law here. You cross me in my diner, you get a warning." The stranger nodded once, polite, collected. Understood. There was a pause, long enough for the sheriff to notice something unusual. The man wasn't shaking. His posture wasn't defensive. There was no fear, no arrogance, no aggression, just presence, absolute presence. And in that pause, something about the man unsettled the sheriff, though he couldn't quite put his finger on it. "Who are you?" the sheriff asked cautiously. The man smiled faintly, a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just a traveler," he replied. But the sheriff saw the faint scar along his jaw, the subtle calluses on his hands, the quiet, restrained control and the way he breathed. Something in him told the sheriff this was no ordinary traveler. At that moment, the waitress set a fresh cup of coffee in front of the stranger. He nodded in thanks, still calm, still measured. The sheriff's hand hovered near his holster. His eyes narrowed. "You're not just a traveler, are you?" he asked, voice lower now. The stranger finally leaned back slightly in his seat, folding his hands neatly on the table. "I used to serve," he said, not loud, not boastful, just a statement. The sheriff leaned forward. "Serve? Military? Local guard?" "Special operations," the stranger said, voice even. The words landed heavy, not just in the sheriff's ears, across the diner, in the hum of the room, in the very air. The sheriff's hand slowly dropped, his jaw tightened. No one moved, no one spoke, because in that moment, every patron, every local, every server, every person sipping coffee realized something profound. This wasn't a man to provoke. This was a man who had faced worse than a slap in a diner. And tonight, the sheriff would learn a lesson he'd never forget.
The sheriff's hand stayed at his side, but his eyes never left the stranger. Patrons whispered quietly, sensing the tension. Even the waitress paused, mug halfway to a booth. "Special operations?" the sheriff repeated, like tasting a foreign word. You mean Navy SEALs?" The stranger nodded once, calm, controlled. "I did my time, served my country, learned a few things along the way. The sheriff leaned back against the counter, trying to hide the sudden unease settling in his chest. He'd dealt with criminals, drunks, even armed suspects, but there was a difference here. Something in the man's posture, his breathing, the way he surveyed the diner. It wasn't confidence, it was control, absolute control. "You just sit here, sip coffee, and let me slap you?" the sheriff asked, attempting to regain authority. The stranger's faint smile didn't betray emotion. "It wasn't about you," he said evenly. "It was about how you handle unexpected situations." The sheriff frowned, confused. What are you talking about?" A sudden movement behind the counter drew his attention, the waitress giving the stranger a discreet nod, the way the trainee cook stepped back, watching quietly. Something about the way people reacted around him told the sheriff more than words ever could. The stranger continued, calm but firm. "You just had a decision in front of you. React immediately or assess first. Most people react first. You reacted." The sheriff's fingers twitched. "You mean that slap?" "Yes." The weight of the statement hit him. He had just been tested, not by a gun, not by a criminal, not by danger, but by presence, by observation. Then the stranger's tone shifted, still quiet but commanding. "I work with people like your deputies, your SWAT teams, federal agents. I train them to think, move, and act under pressure, to survive." The sheriff's eyes widened. You train federal agents?" He nodded slowly. "Yes. Tonight, you were part of my lesson." The room seemed to still completely. The murmurs stopped. The faint hum of the refrigerator became louder in contrast. The sheriff straightened. His mind raced. He had just slapped a man who could teach seasoned officers, even elite federal agents, a lesson in seconds. "Did you just let me test me?" the sheriff asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Not intentionally, but yes, you passed, or at least you're beginning to understand the importance of observation over reaction." The sheriff exhaled slowly. Respect began to replace irritation. Humility replaced pride. He glanced around the diner. Patrons were watching, aware that something extraordinary had just unfolded. The stranger finished his coffee, set the mug down, and adjusted his jacket. "I'm not here to punish, but to remind. Experience teaches, not anger." The sheriff nodded, swallowing hard. I didn't know." "Few do," the stranger said with a slight nod, "but knowing now matters more." The sheriff extended a hand, not as an officer asserting authority, but as a man recognizing respect. The stranger shook it, firm and measured, and in that moment the sheriff realized he had just met someone who had faced life and death decisions every day, someone whose calm in a diner could command more authority than his badge ever could. Tonight, a slap wasn't an insult, it was a lesson. The diner had returned to its casual rhythm, but the sheriff couldn't shake the weight of the encounter. The stranger sipped her coffee slowly, eyes scanning the room, not with suspicion, but with precision. Every movement calculated, every detail noticed. "You see," she said quietly, "control isn't just about strength, it's about awareness, timing, reaction." The sheriff leaned on the counter, intrigued despite himself. "Show me?" he asked, almost hesitantly. She smiled faintly. "Watch first." Without warning, she moved, smooth, silent, impossible to anticipate. In a single fluid motion, she lifted a chair, pivoted, and placed it between two patrons who were about to collide. Perfect timing, no chaos. The sheriff blinked. You just prevented a problem before it happened," she said evenly. "Same principle in combat, same principle when you patrol. Anticipation saves lives. Reaction only keeps you alive for a moment."
Before the sheriff could respond, a trainee from a nearby federal training program who had been observing quietly in the diner stood. "You're showing him the fundamentals," the trainee said, voice filled with awe. "You've trained us like this for years." She nodded. "Basics first. Everyone underestimates the fundamentals." Then, almost casually, she turned her attention back to the sheriff. "You reacted with force first. You assumed threat. That's normal for most people. But assessing first, controlling the environment, that's what separates a patrol officer from someone who survives situations you can't script." The sheriff felt a flush of humility. "So this slap, it was my mistake?" "Not a mistake, a lesson, one you now remember. Awareness before action, calm before chaos. That's how you earn respect." Her voice carried authority without arrogance, every word precise, controlled, measured. And then she stood, moving to the center of the diner. The fluorescent lights caught the glint of her ring and the slight scars along her forearms, subtle reminders of the missions she'd survived. "You think a diner is safe?" she asked softly, almost rhetorically. "Everything can turn hostile in seconds. People make assumptions, mistakes, or react too soon. Awareness isn't optional, it's survival." The sheriff's jaw tightened. He realized how wrong he had been, not just about her, but about himself, about assumptions he carried every day on the patrol. The diner became a silent classroom, and he was the student. She finished her coffee and rose, calm, commanding, every step deliberate, every movement controlled. "You'll remember this," she said, voice low but penetrating. "Not because I slapped you, but because you didn't see it coming, and now you know why it matters." The sheriff swallowed hard. He nodded, respect evident, humility replacing pride. And the patrons, watching quietly, understood one unspoken truth. Crossing her wasn't just foolish, it was impossible to underestimate someone who had been forged in combat and tempered by years of high-stakes missions. The diner was quiet now. Not tense, not fearful, but still. The sheriff leaned against the counter, gripping his hat in both hands. He wasn't angry anymore, not embarrassed, not intimidated, just aware. The stranger, the former Navy SEAL, stood near the doorway, calm, precise, composed. Every inch of her body communicated control and confidence. "You understand now?" she asked quietly, voice carrying just enough authority to command attention without shouting. The sheriff exhaled slowly. "Yes, I get it. I reacted without thinking. I assumed. I underestimated you." She nodded. "Exactly, and that's what most people do. Assumptions get you hurt. Hesitation gets you killed. Awareness keeps you alive." He swallowed. I'm not sure I can ever unlearn what I just learned." "You won't need to," she replied, faint smile on her lips, "because now you know the difference between reacting and observing, between authority and respect, and that's the lesson you take with you." The sheriff looked around at the diner, patrons subtly watching, trying not to stare. Even the waitress had a small smile, impressed but silent. He extended his hand, not as a lawman asserting power, but as a man offering genuine acknowledgement. She shook it firmly, solid, measured. "Thank you," he said simply, for teaching me." Her eyes softened slightly. No one is beyond learning, not even a sheriff. For a moment, silence reigned. Then the faint hum of the refrigerator returned. Cups clinked. Conversations resumed, softer now, with a sense that everyone had just witnessed something extraordinary. The sheriff adjusted his hat, taking a final glance at her. You've trained federal agents, right?" "Yes," she said calmly, and I've learned the same lessons from them." He nodded slowly, respect now fully replacing pride, humility shining through. She moved to the door, pausing as she reached it, turned once, looked back at the sheriff. "You'll never forget this." "I won't." The door closed behind her, and in that diner, on that ordinary afternoon, everyone understood something profound. Respect isn't given. It isn't earned through title or authority. It's earned through presence, discipline, and mastery of oneself. And sometimes it comes in the most unexpected ways, like a calm stranger, a simple slap, and a lesson that changes how you see the world.